Rebound. Today's topic. Welcome to another episode of Suspension 101 with Infinity Cyclery. My name is Brian Wells. Let's jump right into it. Rebound is the little red dial on the bottom of your fork and the side of your shock. Rebound is used to control the stored energy in your spring during the return of the fork or shock's travel. Before we go any further, it's important to understand the direction of the dial. As we go all the way clockwise, that will be the most dampening. And from there, we typically will count clicks back, so counterclockwise, and that will be our reference number. So if I said 5 clicks of rebound, we would go all the way clockwise till it bottoms out or stops moving. Don't want to break it, so be gentle. And then start turning that counterclockwise 1 click at a time until we hear 5 clicks. Another important factor to consider is your progression. As your shock has smaller volume in it, the pressure ramps up more and more exponentially as you go through the travel. This can really throw off rebound adjustments, and the more volume spacers you typically have, what you'll find is that pressure gets so high as you go deep into your travel, it's easy to overload that low speed rebound setting that's going to be on most of your forks and shocks. Some forks and shocks will give you a high speed adjustment, which you can use to help control that extra pressure brought into by volume spacer. So during the initial shock setup for the rebound, I like to make sure that it's not so fast that the tire's bouncing off the ground. I've slowly dialed it in until all of that pogo stick feeling goes away. We're gonna start from here and hop onto the bike and see how it rides. I'm kind of testing the rear feels a little bit slower than the front here. Might be doing some adjustment, faster or slower, to where the bike returns to its travel quickly, but doesn't want to bounce off the ground unless I pull it off the ground. Next thing I'm going to try to do is get that rear rebound a little bit more accurate. I'm going to try and find a curb. In this case, all I have is a little rock here, but I'm going to try and roll over this rock slowly to get a little bit of a bounce going in the rear shock while I'm seated on it. So here the rebound looks just about perfect. The shock's not bouncing too much. I'm going to pull up my multi-tool and actually open up the shock dramatically on the rebound to kind of demonstrate what too fast a rebound looks like over this object.
Too fast. All right, so this is a lot of rebound.
So notice here how my butt comes off the seat and the tire comes off the ground. Right here, we get the full compression, and immediately I'm already starting to get thrown over the front of the bike, and you'll see how much I'm oscillating after the fact. So it's that bouncing that we want to try to eliminate. So it's way too fast to rebound.
A lot of rebound.
So next thing we're going to do is we're going to start tightening in that rebound. I'm going to go 4 clicks tighter, and we're going to see how much that makes a difference. Although slightly better, we can still see that we have some oscillation going on. So we're going to go 4 clicks tighter yet again and see where that lands us. The shock, I think, has a total adjustment of 16 clicks of rebound in that rear. Although you can see there is still a little bit of an initial buck to the seat right here. The oscillation is actually much better after the fact. So you can watch the shock and see how much less it's actually bobbing. It's still there, but it's getting better. So here we're going to add yet another 4 clicks tighter and see what happens.
Too slow. Way too slow. Like, now weighs 1,000 pounds in the back as well. Too slow. So, split the difference. Feels pretty good. I'm gonna try going one side than the other. We're gonna try going one side, one faster, and then split the difference the other way. Pretty good. Bobbles just a little bit. So I'm gonna go tighter. 2 clicks. We're gonna try again, And if it's too slow, then I'll back out one click and we'll call it spot on. Again, this is just basic low speed rebound setup. Yeah, that was perfect. Bike still feels like it'll respond pretty well. Yeah, I would call that good.
So for your forks, pretty simple. I like to set it up so that your bars return as fast as possible while your tire remains on the ground. This will ensure that the bike returns to sag and is ready for the next bump.
Woo, that's a wrap. That's how we set our low speed rebound.
For those of you that like to get a little more technical, I'm gonna have you hop on over and take a look at this sketch so I can explain it in a little bit more detail. So this is a little shock drawing that I did. This is a little inside view of an air shock for the rear of your bike. What ends up happening is as you compress the shock ends, this air piston, this guy here, this outer body, it's attached to an air piston, starts to compress an air volume in here. And the bigger the air volume, the easier it is for that guy to move all the way through its travel. The smaller the air volume, the more progressive, so the more that air pressure in here will ramp up. So it's really important to understand that when you're controlling your rebound, you're trying to keep this piston from slamming back down after you've compressed it. And the more rebound you add, the more control and the slower that piston can return. An important note is that as this piston goes in and the air pressure goes up and up and up, your rebound dial typically will only adjust low speed rebound. The low speed rebound is more to be able to control the piston in its lower half, or its upper half of its stroke. So when it's 0% travel to about 50% travel, your low speed adjustment will make a big difference here. So it might help the bike feel a little more composed and a little more planted, or maybe a little more poppy on pavement, parking lot kind of testing, or even small bumps on the trail. But as soon as you compress the air piston past roughly 50%, your air volume starts to get really small and that pressure ramps up dramatically. So you have all this energy stored when you have the shock fully compressed, and that initial stroke as it's starting to return, your low speed rebound gets overwhelmed and typically revolves on a high speed rebound circuit to take over. So the high speed rebound is going to control from bottom out, so 100% travel, to about 50%, and then your low speed rebound is going to take over. There is a little bit of an overlap, so your low speed will control a little bit further and your high speed might control a little bit less. And the higher you add, the more pressure you add to the shock, the more this can change. So if I add a lot of pressure, that kind of crossover point might lower down here. So as your piston's getting just a little bit into its travel, it's already hit that 600 PSI mark that you would have been hitting up here if you had a little bit less pressure. So it's important to note that the more pressure you run, the more rebound you run. The tighter the rebound you must run. And there can be a point where you're outside of the range if you're a heavier rider, where you have your rebound turned in really far, and it's only really helping you on the first little bit of travel. But once you compress that shock too far, your high speed rebound is trying to control so much and that's set from the factory on a lot of these shocks. You can't adjust the high speed rebound on most shocks that are coming on bikes, unless you have something like a Fox Float X2, DHX2, or for the rear shock. And for the fork, you'd be looking at like a Performance Elite Fox fork or a factory Fox fork. Those guys have high speed rebound, so you can actually adjust this top half of the travel, or even more so, you can really start adjusting the sensitivity if you're a heavier weight rider. So yeah, 200 something pounds. So when we're setting the bike up for Kelly, we might note that high speed rebound would be a little bit more important for someone of his weight range or higher, because it has a lot more effect over that pressure when it starts ramping way up. Another thing to note is if you have a volume reducer in here, and let's say you take out some of this volume so that your shock is only using from here to here as far as the air it can compress, you'll realize that as that compresses, your air pressure is ramping way up and you'll need even more high speed rebound to control it. So this is where people are so focused on volume spacers for bottom out control, but they don't realize that the more volume spacers you add, when your shock is near fully compressed, it has so much energy stored into it that it's gonna overload the high-speed rebound immediately. So you might have a bike that wallows really bad over like undulating terrain when you're seated. You know, if you're kind of riding over like maybe a pretty sharp route, and you're gonna find that bike is gonna actually want to kick you off the seat a bit, even if your rebound feels right everywhere else. Because once it's compressed over that route, you're sitting way into the travel during that split second, and now it's trying to pop out of that travel really fast. A lot of energy stored in there. So I always like to kind of shoot for the more linear approach, and I think the less volume reducers you can get away with, the better. If you need them because you're bottoming out, you know, easily, and you don't need, like, you feel like you can easily overwhelm the bike, add a volume spacer. If you don't think you can overwhelm the bike, or at least not, you know, very easily, maybe on demand you can get to bottom out, but it's like something you do on purpose, maybe off of like a good drop where you're kind of pushing into it hard. That's when you might, you know, need to play with volume spacers to get that correct. But what I like to tell people is the less volume spacers, the better. Makes that rebound tuning way more predictable. So you don't have to dive into the high speed circuit so much and really try to get that crossover perfect.